More than 200 House members and over 37 senators are now calling on U.S. President Donald Trump to resign, be removed from office, or face impeachment. Top Republicans joining that list.
Well, I think the best way for our country, Chuck, is for the president to resign and go away as soon as possible.
Even the president's former acting chief of staff and one of his greatest offenders has had enough.
The ideas of the Republican Party are bigger than one man, but I think if you have any role at all in what happened on Wednesday, that you don't deserve to leave the party anymore.
A procession carrying the body of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, killed in the riots, drove by the Capitol Sunday afternoon when the White House finally lowered its flag to half-mast. The flag was lowered at the Capitol Friday. The president remains out of sight, as many lawmakers fear what his loyalists may do next.
The number of death threats that have been thrown out against people like me and, frankly, every member of Congress. Look at Vice President Pence, one of the most faithful guys to Donald Trump, is now public enemy #1 in Trump world.
Several sources inside the White House say President Trump hasn't spoken to Pence since the siege.
What's good, people? Jack Mockler is back again. A federal court ruling has landed with such devastating force that even Trump's loyal defenders are whispering, "It's over." The walls haven't just closed in. They've collapsed entirely. This isn't just bad news. It's a legal catastrophe with no escape hatch this time. Let me paint you a picture of just how brutal this moment really is. A federal judge, someone who's supposed to be calm, measured, impartial, just went nuclear from the bench. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This wasn't a stern warning. This was the judicial system drawing a line in the sand and telling Trump, "You've crossed it for the last time." We're talking about massive fraud penalties being upheld at full force, asset freezes that have been authorized to kick in immediately, criminal contempt referrals that have been filed and are moving forward, and the language coming from that judge's mouth, absolutely scorching.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is requesting members return to Washington. An article of impeachment against the president is expected to be introduced late Monday or Tuesday, but some want to delay a possible Senate trial.
Let's give President-elect Biden the 100 days he needs to get his agenda off and running, and maybe we'll send the articles sometimes after that.
To protect lawmakers and others, Twitter has silenced the president. Apple and Amazon have cracked down on another site favored by extremists, Parler. Washington is under a state of emergency. Its mayor has asked the Department of Homeland Security for added protection starting Monday, as the National Guard erects what it says is a non-scalable fence protecting the Capitol ahead of Inauguration Day. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
All right, let's get the bottom line with CNN political analyst and legendary Watergate journalist Carl Bernstein. And Carl, pretty fitting that we have you on this morning. Obviously, the Nixon tapes were part of the ultimate demise of the Nixon presidency. But you say the tape that we heard this weekend from President Trump calling the Georgia Secretary of State, asking him to find 11,870 votes or 780 votes, you say it's even worse than the Nixon tapes. Why? What makes this so bad?
Words like flagrant disregard for the Constitution and maximum legal sanctions weren't thrown around casually. They were delivered like a verdict on everything Trump has done for years. The judge basically looked at a pattern of obstruction, defiance, and delay tactics that have stretched on for what feels like forever, and said, "Enough. No more patience. No more second chances. No more treating court orders like polite suggestions you can ignore if you don't feel like following them." This ruling wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't open to interpretation. It was the legal equivalent of a sledgehammer through glass, and the shards are landing everywhere. And here's where it gets truly terrifying for Trump. The timing of this nightmare couldn't be worse. He's already facing growing calls for resignation from members of Congress. His political support isn't just wavering, it's crumbling in real time, like sand slipping through an hourglass that's almost empty.
As the President of the United States, we are listening in real time to the President propose that there be a conspiracy to steal the election for the presidency of the United States. A coup, whatever word we choose to use. A dangerously out of control, unstable President of the United States provoking a constitutional crisis. And it's no accident that the generals in particular and the Defense Department officials are aware and are now saying out loud that the incumbent president of the United States is the gravest threat to the national security of the United States that we have. This is unprecedented, it is extraordinary, and it is time for the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership of the Senate and the House to demand that this president of the United States resign immediately. If this had happened and this tape were released at any other moment in our history except Donald Trump's presidency, I think it's a very certain thing.
The walls have been pressing in from every direction for months, but now the courts have basically stepped in and said, yeah, we're done playing your games. Time to pay the piper. Time to face real consequences. Time to comply with every single outstanding order or face immediate arrest. Let that sink in for a moment. Immediate arrest. Not another fine. Not another sanction. Not another delay or appeal or motion to reconsider. Arrest. Handcuffs. Federal marshals showing up at his door. That's what the judge explicitly warned. Continued non-compliance will result in Donald Trump being taken into custody like any other citizen who defies the law.
That the resignation of the President of the United States immediately would be demanded, or he would be impeached and convicted in the Senate post haste.
Carl, these former defense secretaries who have taken it upon themselves to band together to write a public letter to the American public, basically sounding a cautionary note that there's no role for the military in election results. I mean, they're not putting it in as fine a point on it as you are. They're not saying that the president is a danger to the American people, but they're doing this for some reason. And so
they know it.
Yeah, what do you think
they
they're
know
saying?
it even better? They know it even better than I, because they know more classified information than I know. But I do know this from some of those people's aides who have signed that letter, et cetera, people in the intelligence community, that there already has been something that Trump has done in the past few weeks that deeply, deeply troubled.
Can you even wrap your head around that? A former president of the United States, potentially a sitting one depending on where things stand, being led away in restraints because he refused to obey court orders. The optics alone would trigger a constitutional crisis of unprecedented proportions. It's insane, it's uncharted territory, and it's exactly where we find ourselves right now. You have to understand the backstory here to appreciate just how cornered Trump really is. For years, literally years, he's been defying court orders, ignoring subpoenas, treating the judicial system like an inconvenience rather than the bedrock of American democracy.
The intelligence community, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the generals, some kind of provocative action somewhere in the world that he had to be talked down from instigating. Don't know exactly what it is. We can speculate on trouble areas, Iran, the South China Sea, others. Something happened. Look, it has been a known fact that those closest to President Trump in his presidency in the national security area, his chiefs of staff, all concluded years and months ago that he was the principal danger to the national security of the United States, not our foreign adversaries. We also have his niece telling us about his mental state. Same kind of picture of him we've gotten from his principal aides who have left his presidency, but we've heard now from a family member. We are looking at a dangerously unstable.
He's pushed the limits further than anyone thought possible, assuming that his status, his wealth, his political power would always shield him from real accountability. But this judge just made it crystal clear that those days are over. The shield is gone. The protection has evaporated. And now Trump is standing in the open with nothing but bad options in front of him. The financial implications alone are staggering. We're talking about asset seizures that have been formally authorized. Trump's properties, the ones he spent a lifetime building his brand around, could be on the chopping block. His businesses, his accounts, his golf courses, his name brand towers, all potentially seized to satisfy court-ordered penalties that run into the hundreds of millions, maybe even billions, when you stack up all the different cases and judgments against him. Courts have already denied his final appeals. There's no more legal maneuvering left, no more motions to file, No more clocks to run out. The enforcement is happening now, in real time, and Trump has no clear way to stop it. His legal team has basically run out of ammunition. Every appeal has been rejected with prejudice. Every motion has been denied. Every argument they've thrown at the wall has slid right back down. The courts have spoken with a unified voice, and that voice is saying, you lose on every front, completely and totally. There's no clever strategy left. No Hail Mary pass waiting in the wings. Just the cold, hard reality of a legal system that's finally caught up with someone who thought he could outrun it forever. And then the political fallout started, almost immediately, like dominoes falling in fast forward. Congressional leaders from both parties began releasing statements. Republican backers who've stood by Trump through scandal after scandal suddenly went silent, or worse, started carefully distancing themselves. Major donors who've written seven-figure checks for years signaled through back channels that they can no longer support him. Key White House officials began quietly updating their resumes and looking for exits. Cabinet members started having hushed conversations about what comes next, conversations that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. The message from all of them, public and private, was remarkably consistent. Trump's position is untenable. You cannot govern effectively while facing asset seizures, contempt charges, and the very real threat of arrest. You can't function as president when your properties are being taken, when your financial empire is collapsing, when federal marshals have you on a short leash. Something has to give. And what has to give, according to basically everyone with power in Washington, is Trump himself. The language coming out of Capitol Hill right now is absolutely brutal, the kind of raw, unfiltered assessment you usually only hear in private. Lawmakers are describing the situation as chaos, a breakdown, a government lurching from one crisis to the next with no steady hand on the wheel, and they're openly saying that the only ways out are resignation, removal, or swift impeachment. Those are the three doors, and Trump has to walk through one of them because staying put is no longer an option. Let me break down what each of those paths actually looks like, because this is where the stakes go from sky high to stratospheric. Option 1. Trump resigns voluntarily. He steps up to a microphone, probably at some ungodly hour, probably with that familiar defiant tone, and announces that he's leaving office to focus on fighting the legal battles ahead. Maybe he tries to spin it as a noble sacrifice. Maybe he tries to negotiate some kind of deal, trading his resignation for certain legal protections or pardons or agreements about how the transition unfolds. Either way, he leaves on his own terms, preserving at least a shred of dignity and some measure of control over the narrative. That would be the cleanest option, the one that avoids the most chaos. But here's the problem with option 1. It requires Trump to do something he's never done in his entire life. It requires him to back down, to surrender, to admit, even implicitly, that the fight is lost. And if there's one thing we know about Donald Trump after all these years, it's that he doesn't back down. He doesn't surrender. He fights and fights and fights some more, even when the odds are impossible, even when everyone around him is screaming that it's time to quit. His entire political brand is built on being the guy who never gives up, who punches back twice as hard, who treats every loss as a conspiracy and every defeat as a setup. So resignation, while clean and dignified, seems like the longest of long shots. Option 2, the 25th Amendment route. The Vice President and a majority of the cabinet come together and make the formal determination that Trump is unable to discharge his duties. They send that determination to Congress, and suddenly the Vice President becomes acting president while the process plays out. It sounds dramatic because it is dramatic. This mechanism was designed for situations where a president is physically or mentally incapacitated, not for legal meltdowns. But here's the thing. Can a president who's facing asset seizures, criminal contempt charges, and threats of arrest truly be said to be able to discharge his duties? Can you conduct foreign policy when your properties are being taken? Can you make national security decisions when you're worried about federal marshals showing up? Cabinet members are actively asking themselves these questions right now. And while the 25th Amendment seemed like a far-fetched fantasy a week ago, it's starting to look disturbingly plausible. Because the practical reality is that Trump may genuinely be unable to function as president while his legal world is collapsing around him. And if the cabinet reaches that conclusion, if they decide that invoking the 25th Amendment is actually the responsible, stabilizing thing to do, then we're in uncharted territory. A president removed not by impeachment, not by resignation, but by his own hand-picked cabinet deciding he's unfit to serve. Option 3 is the one everyone's been talking about for months: impeachment and removal. The House has already been preparing articles of impeachment. The committees have been gathering evidence. The votes have been counted and recounted. And here's what's changed. This court ruling just supercharged the entire process. Now you can add defiance of judicial orders to the list of charges. You can point to this judge's scorching language about flagrant disregard for the Constitution as evidence of Trump's unfitness. You can cite the pattern of obstruction, the contempt referrals, the threats of arrest. It's all ammunition, and it's all explosive. The political dynamics have shifted dramatically as well. When Republican support starts crumbling, when donors start fleeing, when allies start distancing themselves, when the base starts questioning whether the fight is still worth it, the math changes in Congress. Suddenly the votes might actually be there, the votes to impeach in the House, the votes to convict in the Senate. And if that happens, Donald Trump would become the first president in American history to be removed from office through impeachment. Not resigned like Nixon, not voted out like so many others. Removed, forced out, handcuffed by the Constitution itself. But here's where the nightmare scenario really kicks in. What if Trump refuses to accept it? What if he claims the whole thing is illegitimate? A witch hunt, a deep state coup, a rigged process? What if he tries to cling to power despite the constitutional process saying he has to go? Then you've got a genuine crisis on your hands, the kind of crisis that law enforcement has to resolve, the kind of crisis that might require unprecedented action to remove someone who won't leave voluntarily. That's the scenario everyone is desperate to avoid, but it's looking more and more like a real possibility with each passing day. And then there's the donor situation, which is absolutely critical to understanding how fast this is all moving. Wealthy Republican donors, the people who've funded Trump's political machine for years, they care about one thing above all else: protecting their interests, their money, their businesses, their reputations. And when they see a president facing asset seizures, criminal contempt, and potential arrest, they start getting nervous. They start asking hard questions. Could their donations be seen as supporting someone who's defying court orders? Could they be dragged into this mess somehow? Could association with Trump become toxic to their other relationships and ventures? The answer to all those questions is yes, and the donors know it. So they quietly pull back. They stop returning calls. They tell their advisors to find other candidates to support, other causes to fund, other ways to deploy their money that don't come with the same legal and reputational risks. And suddenly, Trump's fundraising dries up. His war chest runs empty. Without money to pay his lawyers, to run his political operations, to fund his various legal battles, his position gets even more desperate. It's a death spiral. The court ruling triggers political abandonment, which triggers financial problems, which makes the legal situation worse, which causes more political abandonment, round and round until there's nothing left. Let me pause here and really hammer home just how devastating this judge's ruling actually is, because I don't think people fully grasp the magnitude of what just happened. This wasn't a close call. This wasn't a split decision where reasonable minds could disagree. The judge came down with the full force of the law and basically said, "You've been playing games with the judicial system for years, and I'm done watching." The asset seizures that have been authorized aren't theoretical, they're active. The government can now literally take Trump's buildings, his golf courses, his accounts, anything necessary to satisfy these massive judgments. Think about what that means for a moment. Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, All those golf courses with his name plastered everywhere, all potentially being seized by court order to pay penalties for fraud and other violations. The humiliation alone would be staggering, watching your entire empire, the thing you've spent your whole life building, being stripped away piece by piece because a judge decided you've defied the law for too long. And there's no way to spin that. No way to claim it's fake news when state officials are literally taking control of your properties. The brand crumbles. The image shatters. The carefully constructed illusion of the billionaire genius who could never lose. Gone. But it's the criminal contempt piece that really pushes this over the edge into unprecedented territory. Civil penalties are one thing. They hurt financially. They damage your reputation. They make life difficult. But criminal contempt means potential jail time. It means Trump could be prosecuted for his repeated defiance of court orders, for his pattern of obstruction, for his open refusal to comply with judicial rulings. And the judge's language on this point was absolutely devastating. Flagrant disregard for the law and the Constitution. Those aren't words a federal judge uses lightly. That's a judge who's looked at the evidence and concluded that Trump has systematically and deliberately treated the legal system with contempt. And then there's the arrest warning, the thing that's keeping everyone in Washington up at night. The judge specifically put Trump on notice. Comply with these orders immediately, or you will be taken into custody. Not maybe, not possibly, will be. That's a direct threat, and it creates a no-win scenario of almost unimaginable proportions. If Trump complies, he has to accept the penalties, post the bonds, allow the asset seizures. He has to surrender, admit defeat, accept that the courts have beaten him. And for someone whose entire identity is built around never backing down, that's psychologically almost impossible to imagine. His instinct will always be to fight, to defy, to claim the whole thing is rigged. But if he does that here, if he continues the pattern of defiance, federal marshals show up and arrest him. A sitting president being led away in handcuffs. The biggest constitutional crisis in American history, unfolding in real time on every screen in the country. It would dominate every news cycle, consume every conversation in Washington, make it impossible for Trump to function as president or even pretend to govern. So he's caught between surrender and arrest, and neither option allows him to continue. That's the trap. That's the box the judge just locked him inside. The political analysts and legal commentators across the spectrum, not just the ones who've always opposed Trump, but the neutral ones, the careful ones, the ones who've bent over backward to give him the benefit of the doubt, they're all saying the same thing. This ruling has effectively ended Trump's ability to govern, not made it harder, not created challenges. Ended it. Because you can't conduct foreign policy when world leaders know you're facing asset seizures. You can't make national security decisions when you're worried about being arrested. You can't manage the executive branch when cabinet members are discussing your removal. You can't work with Congress when lawmakers from both parties are calling for your resignation. The authority that comes with the presidency, the credibility, the power, the ability to make decisions and have them matter, it all evaporates when you're in the kind of legal and political freefall Trump is in right now. Orders get ignored. Decisions get questioned. The machinery of government starts to seize up because no one knows if the person at the top will even be there tomorrow. And you're left with the title of president, but none of the actual power. A shell of a presidency that can't function, can't lead, can't do the basic things that need to be done to keep the country running. So what happens next? Based on everything we're seeing, the end is coming fast. The legal walls have closed in. The political support has evaporated. The financial penalties are being enforced. The threats of arrest are real and immediate. And there's simply no path forward that allows Trump to continue governing effectively. The only questions now are how and when, not whether. Will he resign? Will the cabinet invoke the 25th Amendment? Will Congress impeach and convict? Those are the possibilities, and one of them is going to happen, probably much sooner than anyone expected. We're watching the endgame play out in real time, the final chapter of one of the most chaotic, controversial presidencies in American history. And it's messy, it's chaotic, it's unprecedented. But it's happening right now, as we speak. The pieces are moving. The decisions are being made behind closed doors. Within days, maybe even hours, we're going to know how this ends. Whether Trump goes quietly or goes kicking and screaming, whether he resigns with a statement or gets removed in handcuffs, the era of his presidency surviving through sheer force of will and political loyalty, that era is over. The court ruling saw to that. One judge, one ruling, one moment that changed everything. And now it's just a question of how the final act plays out. So stay tuned. Keep watching, because history is being made right now, and you're witnessing it in real time. The end is coming, and it's coming fast.